5.
Do not think for a minute that the Tories will recover. They're even talking this morning about Rishi resigning, as if a sixth leader is somehow going to inspire everybody. They're done. They're toast, and they thoroughly deserve it, in my view.
4.
All the bribes and blandishments that the Tories are throwing at the electorate with increasing desperation every day was like Rishi's advent calendar.
3.
This manifesto is more about holding his own party together than it is about appealing to parts of the electorate where the Tories have still got at least some chance of adding to their vote tally.
In the bitterest irony in British political history, could we go from an 80-seat majority in 2019 to 80 seats?
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. The election campaign's hotting up co-pilot, even though the overall result seems obvious. Labour are heading for a big, possibly huge majority, not least since Rishi Sunak caused such offence by bunking off the most important part of the D-Day celebrations. The Tory manifesto was published this week and is careful and cautious, rather than the kind of big and bold offer that might yet stand a chance of moving the electoral dial. Labour's huge poll lead seems unassailable, despite a distinct lack of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer and a sense that when it comes to it, Labour will further raise a UK tax burden already at a historic high. And as hope drains away, there are disturbing signs, even in the midst of an election campaign, that the inevitable Tory bust-up about the future direction of the party and its post-election leadership is now bursting into the open. We grew up as journalists, Allison, being told and believing that elections are won in the centre ground. Yet what we've just seen on the continent, with elections to the European Parliament, suggests such comfortable views are increasingly outdated. Support surged for parties determined to control immigration, not least in France and Germany, including among younger voters. European Greens, meanwhile, and others wedded to net zero policies above all else, also lost voters in droves. It seems the old left-right divide is fading. We're now seeing a battle emerging between third-way technocratic managerialism versus a rampant populism that disdains pretty much the entire political and media class and feels the system is ripping voters off and taking them for fools. Lots to discuss, co-pilot, but before we start, can I just say, after the fabulous Claire Fox joined me in the Planet Normal cockpit last week, it's good to have you back for this, your first episode since our wonderful live event celebrating Planet Normal's 200th episode.
Yes, a huge thank you to Claire, who is always so marvellous. I was listening to her on a Turkish seafront, tempted to bring home another Turkish cat, if only to give you more material for the next year. Yeah, just before we dive into the extraordinary events that are going on, that 200th anniversary at the Cadogan Hall was a really joyous occasion. Thanks so much to everybody who came, everyone who sent in fantastic questions. And honestly, Liam, if you could have bottled the atmosphere in that hall, that would have been a tonic to keep us going through the entire year. We're so lucky to have such brilliant and affectionate and adoring listeners. But coming on to where we are now, I thought of a rather nice little aperçu. Are you ready for this?
God.
So, in the bitterest irony in British political history, could we go from an 80-seat majority in 2019 to 80 seats? Because that is what we are looking at, isn't it? And they are very worried now. In fact, I think we've had a lot of laughs this week, haven't we? There are lots of Rishi Sunak, sort of satire on his deciding to bunk off, as you said, from the climax of the D-Day celebrations. There's a poster of him. Instead of the longest day, it's the shortest day, isn't it?
On the beaches and saving private equity as opposed to saving Private Ryan.
I thought that was cruel, but yet oddly opposite. There was a headline in the week which has basically said, Sunak says I am not resigning during the election campaign, which is a bit of a low. But where we are now, as we're recording on Wednesday afternoon, Grant Shapps and other senior Tories are going around warning against giving Labour a supermajority. So really, Rishi's at the controls of the plane and powering towards the mountain. And we did have, as you said, Liam, we had the unveiling this week of the manifesto, which was a bit of something for everything. I should say that a Planet Normal listener had an absolutely brilliant observation, which they said that all the bribes and blandishments that the Tories are throwing at the electorate with increasing desperation every day was like Rishi's advent calendar, basically. What's he going to give us today?
Yeah.
A Shetland pony?
Yeah.
A lifetime supply of shampoo. So there was the Conservative manifesto, and I think some of us were hoping for some pretty strong things from that. People, as we know, we'll talk about this in more detail later, people are very much now committing to voting reform, and it would have taken some fairly kind of pungent centre-right policies to lure them back. But absolutely extraordinarily, I thought there was no leaving of the ECHR, which we know would be vital to make the Rwanda plan work and to restore control over our borders, which is so important to all those extremely disillusioned Conservative voters. But I wanted to ask you, Liam, obviously more tax cuts on offer, 17.2 billion tax cuts, cut in national insurance of 10.3 billion, scrap the self-employed national insurance altogether, 2.6 billion, and other tax cuts, 4.3 billion. So that's just over 17 billion bonanza for everybody. And I just want to know, I was trying to work out. So they're saying where this money is coming from, even though they don't mention how much debt we're in already. So cutting tax avoidance and evasion, 6 billion. And welfare reform, 12 billion. They haven't managed to get a single person off their backside and back into work, have they? How are they going to find that 12 billion, co-pilot?
Yeah, I think the numbers in the Tory manifesto, while they sort of add up internally, they are pretty heroic in terms of the assumptions that they make. And I must say, I think the Institute for Fiscal Studies is actually soft-pedaled on laying into the Tory policies. Maybe they're feeling sorry for them. We should say that the Tories have made welfare reform savings in the past, more accurately, reductions in the increasing spending in welfare. Let's be completely clear. But the more you try and reduce the rise in spending in that part of the government's budget, the harder each incremental saving is to make, particularly when demography, immigration and so on, but other factors too, more Brits who have been here for many years not working, your ability to make the economy produce the tax that you want it to becomes harder and harder. I love your 80-80 strategy.
Oh, I thought you'd like that.
You've been saying, to your credit, for some time that the Tories could go below 100 seats. We had a little bet, didn't we, at that 200th episode? I said nearer 150. You said nearer 100. Maybe the only chance I've got of winning that. Well, who knows? We'll see. But it strikes me that the manifesto, it kind of falls between two stools. It's not big and bold enough to satisfy people who think Sunak isn't conservative enough and people who might be voting reform, but it's still conservative enough to annoy lots of Lib Dems. And of course, the Tories are fighting lots of Tory Lib Dem marginals, particularly in the southeast of England and the southwest. It's almost as if Sunak can't make a decision. It's almost as if this manifesto is more about holding his own party together than it is about appealing to parts of the electorate where the Tories have still got at least some chance of adding to their vote tally. Take the ECHR. The language on that was very cleverly crafted. It's almost as if a sort of very senior Sir Humphrey had been sort of wheeled in order to come up with conveniently ambiguous language. It says, if we have to choose between our national security and the jurisdiction of a foreign court, we will always choose national security. Of course, huge wiggle room there. But had they put in their manifesto, Allison, we're definitely leaving the ECHR, so then you would have had open rebellion from people on the left of the Conservative Party. You'd have had people gainsaying their own party policy on the doorsteps because that's what works in their constituency. And you would have had a complete meltdown in the Tories, a huge split emerging, even before the votes are cast on July the 4th because Conservatives now know that it's all about who leads the party, what is the direction of the party after the election, and that will be determined in the first instance, not by the activists, but under current rules by the remaining Conservative MPs. And among those remaining Conservative MPs, given the sort of centrist One Nation types that central office has been parachuting into safe seats like crazy in recent days, and the fact that lots of red wall Tories, your Miriam Cates, Jake Berries, Simon Clarks and so on, who appeal more to the right of the party, they're going to lose their seats. So the remaining much smaller rump of the Conservative Parliamentary Party after this election could be skewed much more to the One Nation wing of the party rather than the right of the party. And that's going to cause a huge row, particularly if there's a bloke in the Commons, a one-man party for reform called Nigel Farage. In my view, he will then start attracting Tory defectors, existing post-election MPs.
I hear what you're saying, but you're talking about internal party discipline with 3 weeks to go until the poll.
Which is proof they've given up.
Yes, but exactly what they needed to do. How many times have I got to say this? We've had 11 by-elections in the latest parliament. And in each by-election, where I think the Tories only held on to one, in each by-election, what we saw was a very, very tiny increase in the Labour vote, no enthusiasm for Keir Starmer, a massive number of Conservatives staying home.
Allison, just before you move on, just a little mathematical interlude, because I just want Planet Normal listeners who aren't as steeped in politics as us. I know you all always deny you don't know anything about politics. I'm sure the House of Commons itself would beg to differ. There are 650 MPs, right? And in 2019, Boris returned 365 MPs, 365 Tories, and that was his 80-seat majority. Since then, because of by-elections, as you say, we're down to 346 Tory MPs. That's what it was at when there was dissolution. So if they go from 346 to 80, that's astonishing.
Yes, it is indeed astonishing. But what I'm trying to say to you is the people they need to get out to vote for them have not been voting at all. So there are at least 3 million former Tory voters who won't vote for them because they think they're absolutely cretinous Lib Dems. So Rishi had an opportunity to do one courageous and, colourful thing. And what did he do? He said a promise to halve immigration, which isn't much of a promise from the staggeringly high level they've allowed it to get to. So the last year's immigration figure net was 680,000. If he halves it, that's still more than 3 times what David Cameron said it was going to be. And I've written extensively in my column today, Telegraph column today, we'll put the link in the show notes, that crazy levels of immigration lie behind almost all of the problems that beset our country now, from shortages of housing, huge pressure on public services, welfare benefits, and on and on. So the Tory offering in the manifesto is absolutely pitiful. And in fact, Liam, this will really make you laugh, was that not only are they going to try to cut immigration, but first they're going to ask the permission of some quango to see if it's okay to cut it. I mean, absolutely spineless. And there's also something that really made me yelp.
Yelp?
Puppies
yelp?
Puppy yelp. I mean, furious, Scooby.
National newspaper columnists don't yelp.
Well, so this is the Inclusive Britain plan. Inclusive Britain plan. What actual Conservative voters want is more excluding of people who don't make a contribution. We do not want young white boys falling foul of human resources algorithms, which deny them opportunity in their own country. So this is a really feeble document. In fact, a phrase I rather like, because Labour's Wes Streeting called it the most expensive panic attack in history, which I thought was pretty good.
He's channeling Gerald Kaufman, isn't he?
Yes.
The Labour MP who, seen on the right of the party, extremely mercurial wit, good House of Commons performer, who called Michael Foot's 1983 manifesto the longest suicide note in history.
That's right.
It was all about nuclear disarmament, and at that time, Labour leaving the European Union, believe it or not. How times change.
But can we just have a little Velma moment? Because I know. I know.
Here she goes. The only Planet Normal participant who might possibly yelp is Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo, absolutely. So this shows why the Tories are now, I think it's gone from being a trickle to reform to an absolute torrent. So according to the latest poll from Redfield and Wilton, Reform is in second place behind Labour, with voters aged 45 to 54 and 55 to 64. Now, that's part of the key age range, Liam, for the Tory base. And Reform is even second among 18 to 24s, where the Conservatives are in a miserable fifth place with that younger age bracket. Guess what? They can't rent a room in a horrible London flat for less than some staggering amount a month. And if you cut out London and Scotland from the figures, Reform are ahead of the Conservatives, particularly in the Red Wall and with men. And that is with very little money or organisation. So I think what we're seeing, and coming back, I wanted to ask you about what's happened in Europe, which you mentioned at the top, which is amazing, because I think what's happening, I thought you depicted it very well, this standoff between the globalists.
Must have been a fluke. A fluke.
No, I think, occasionally,
Every now and then. I mean, even a monkey will eventually spurt out Shakespeare if it sits there for 1,000,000 years.
That's you, typing in a room, occasionally hitting on the to be or not to be soliloquy. But this idea, I think, so what we've seen, I think what's driving a lot of this shift in the UK and clearly abroad is that we've had this liberal consensus, which a lot of people don't share. And increasingly, as our country is overwhelmed and nothing works, and then anyone who dares to pipe up, like me occasionally, and then it's your far right. Now, we are people who are absolute mainstream conservatives are now far right, and people are not going to put up with it, Liam. My kids can't afford to live anywhere. I'm not going to be called far right when I point out that pressure of immigration is causing these terrible rising prices and shortages. And that's what we seem to have seen across the continent, I think, is this astonishing surge, particularly in France, for Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party. We've got to talk about Marine's toy boy, haven't we? Jordan Bardella.
Oh, God. It's Allison's new squeeze, by the way. Now Macron's looking a bit frayed around the edges. She moves swiftly on. Allison, how am I meant to feel? How am I meant to feel when you trade me in for a younger model?
He's only 28. He's the age of my daughter, Liam. I can't possibly. So Macron has did this extraordinary thing because faced with this, unbelievable surge of support. And I suppose what I would say to you is, so everyone says, Marine Le Pen, appalling, far right, all the kind of Katya Adler on the BBC News swoons away, needs smelling salts to prop her up on her nightly reports of doom. And you think, okay, so this woman is whatever they think, fascist, hard right. She's got 92% of the constituencies of France backing her. Are they all fascist, Liam? Or would they like their country to come first for a change?
The European results really were incredible. And it's only because we're in the middle of an election campaign here that they're not getting more attention. Yeah. Or maybe, Allison, it isn't, because they wouldn't have got a lot of attention anyway, because they are signalling trends that an awful lot of our broadcasters in particular do not want to acknowledge. The result in France is astonishing, with Le Pen's party getting almost a third of the vote, twice as many as Macron's party. But it's not just in France, is it? In Germany, AfD did far, far better than many people expected. Alternative for Deutschland, a party well to the right of Angela Merkel's CDU, with policies that even make Nigel Farage blush, as we will hear later in this podcast.
Yeah.
So there was a move towards many parties in Spain, in Finland, in Italy, who are determined to drive down immigration. But also the Greens took a bit of a walloping, not least among younger voters. That was really astonishing for me. If you look at those French results, again, les écologistes, the Greens, they went from 25% to less than 10% among 18 to 24-year-olds. And Rassemblement National, brackets, far right, Le Pen's party, among 18 to 24-year-olds, they went from less than 15% to almost 40% among 18 to 24-year-olds. A party which many of their parents would absolutely disdain. And this is what Macron is betting. He's betting that the European elections are a protest vote, and he's saying to the French electorate, okay, you want to vote her into our national parliament. And that vote, of course, a snap election, which is happening in just a few weeks, again, makes our processes seem very, very slow.
Does.
That's going to happen at the end of June. And the result of that will be, I think, in terms of the future direction of Europe and indeed the Western world, far more consequential than our general election campaign.
Yes, and I think that those Green results are very interesting, Liam, because we are going to have, with Ed Miliband coming in as mad net zero minister, we've actually had one of the most disturbing things of this week. We've really struggled, haven't we, to detect any Labour policies at all. But the Labour Shadow Transport Secretary, Lou Haig, says that Labour will compel everyone who buys a new car by 2030 to buy electric. Now, that is the level of madness we are talking about amongst our incoming government. There isn't enough electricity to power all those vehicles.
Absolutely. And if you talk to senior people in the car industry, to compel the 2030 target, you are opening the door to mass imports from China of electric vehicles, because our domestic car production facilities will not be able to produce electric vehicles in that number, not least because we haven't got the battery making factories. And that is a policy that takes it's virtue signaling to a point of complete irresponsibility when you think that hundreds of thousands of people work in the British car industry, and we will be handing a huge chunk of it to an overseas producer.
But this is my big hope now, because we are going to get this truly mediocre Starmer government coming in, but they are very soon going to come a cropper, and boy, are we going to relish them coming a cropper, Liam. It's going to be very funny, because the withdrawal from the support for the Greens across Europe is going to mean a falling off of investment. It's going to be a retreat across Europe from net zero targets. So the UK is going to be in splendid isolation, looking ever more deranged. So I think that if indeed, I mean, you wrote brilliantly at the weekend about...
Oh, don't say that. No one believes you.
No, you did. You did. As I said, every so often, it's it's a bit hit and miss. But on the absurd situation with our North Sea oil and gas, which Labour seems to think is just a sort of piggy bank that they can go and slam some more sort of taxes on, help themselves to the oil and gas, not realising that oil and gas companies eventually grow tired of being pillaged by deranged socialists. As you say, it is reckless and naive. And I think that that's going to be an extraordinary, very early problem for Labour, committed to these targets, which are undeliverable and unaffordable. And can I just say, this has really made my week. So in the diary for when Starmer becomes Prime Minister, almost within a few days, he is in the diary is a lovely schmooze with David Lammy and Macron, because the French are coming over. How bloody fantastic would it be if it was Marine Le Pen and the handsome male model boyfriend? I mean, meeting Lammy, to have David Lammy in a room with Marine Le Pen, I'm almost prepared to have a Labour victory of 419 seats, because it would be so much fun.
Just before we move on, because we've got a really incredible interview for Planet Normal listeners, let me just do, to end, a little economic interlude here. It's worth saying, just on the North Sea, that even the government's own climate change commission is sort of internal conscience that has legal powers to hold the government to account over its policies to hit the net zero targets that are now in law, of course, ever since that bill was introduced under Theresa May. Even they say, on the best assumptions of how quickly we can move to renewables, even if all this technology that isn't yet invented suddenly emerges, even if we got all the lithium and the rare earths that are in the hands of not our friends to build all the wind farms and the solar panels and the batteries for the cars and so on. Even under all those Panglossian assumptions.
Oh, I like that word.
If you're going to use aperçu, I'm going to raise you to Panglossian. Okay?
Panglossian.
I did English A-level too.
I know. I could have read English at Oxford, says Liam Halligan, age 17 and a half. We've heard it all before.
They weren't ready for me. They weren't ready for me. Even if all those Panglossian assumptions come true,
yes,
the UK will still be using oil and gas by 2050 for 25% of our energy, right?
But not in Ed Miliband's Britain, it won't.
So we're still going to need the oil and gas. So let's use our own. So we don't have to import it from elsewhere, which involves much bigger carbon emissions. So we keep our oil and gas industry, which provides tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of skilled jobs. So we keep our oil and gas industry, which generates tax that pays for everything else, that subsidizes the renewable companies. It's totally mad what they're doing in the North Sea. And just a final bit on the economy, because it is new news. And it is getting lost in the sort of mad politics that's surrounding us. The UK economy has flatlined in April, and that is a big reversal. At the beginning of the year, the ONS literally used the word gangbusters. I don't know how that got past Sir Humphrey to describe the growth in the UK economy. And there was a bit of a growth spurt in the first quarter. That growth spurt has now gone. 0% growth is the latest number. And how wrong was it, as it turned out, for the Tories to wait for an autumn election, their original strategy, as the economy got better? In the last couple of days, we've had news that wage growth is still really high, i.e. there's much, much less likely to be an interest rate cut anytime soon. The first one may not come until September or even later now, and we expected 3 by the time of an autumn election. So that's happened. High wage growth. Interest rates aren't going to go anywhere for some time, it seems to me. And on top of that, flat growth. This is exactly what the Tories didn't want to happen. I am starting to feel a bit sorry for Rishi Sunak.
Don't be ridiculous. The man didn't show up for the commemoration of one of the greatest and proudest moments of our history. Don't feel sorry for him at all.
Now, this podcast invites all sorts onto the rocket of right thinking as our interviewee, from holders of high office to ordinary planet normal listeners. But in the here and now of Britain's election campaign, there's one figure really making the political weather. The interview everyone wanted to land. Nigel Farage needs little introduction, and now he's standing in Clacton, the very real prospect of the man who made Brexit happen entering the House of Commons is a potentially seismic political event. Allison and I sat down with the leader of the Reform Party earlier this week for an extended Planet Normal interview.
Nigel, a huge welcome at this exciting stage in the general election campaign to the rocket of right thinking, the refuge of reasoned views, Planet Normal. Nigel, a great friend of mine, said to me that over the weekend she told her family she was going to vote Reform, and her son, who is 22 years old, said, "I always thought you were a bit of a racist, Mum."
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so how do you address that? Are you aware of it? And is there any answer to that sort of toxic reputation, and how fair or unfair is it?
Well, look, I mean, I've seen all this before over 20 years. At times, the sole voice arguing that our policies are wrong, they'll lead to a decline of living standards for British people. Don't forget, it was me alone going into the English Channel in March, April and May of 2020 to warn about that particular problem as well. And of course, this has been the left's technique. Those who want to break down the idea of country, of borders, the old Trotskyite idea that we're all global citizens, what they do is to attack anybody who dares to stand up against it. And the problem is, and most of these problems are caused, not by the left, by conservative cowardice. The sheer cowardice of those in the conservative movement, your sort of David Cameron, George Osborne lot who want to be popular and be invited to the right dinner parties in Notting Hill, that kind of thing. So I'm quite used to that level of prejudice being displayed against me.
How much do you think that the Conservative Party has moved quite drastically to the left. And that, as you say, part of the sort of cunning plan, if you like, is that certain topics have been dictated by them, what is considered to be appropriate material for discussion. And what we now will go on, obviously, to talk about what's happened across Europe, but that topics which are of burning interest to millions of ordinary people have come to be seen as distasteful.
That was the case. It's changing. I think there is a very, very big change. That comment that you picked up is a comment that I rarely hear. I used to hear a lot of it 10 years ago. There is an awakening, an understanding that debating these things is legitimate. So things have changed. But look, I think in life, if you go against the status quo on anything, whether it's science, whether it's business, whether it's politics, you're always going to be painted out by the status quo gang to be mad, bad and dangerous. And that's just the way human beings are. I mean, to be honest with you, I couldn't care less. I had a comical scene yesterday. We were in Walton-on-Mayonnaise and there were two women on the front lawn with a father. And they're screaming, "Come on, Nige, come on, Nige." And over I went and they were all very friendly. And sitting in a chair was the old mum, who's sticking two fingers up, telling me to F off. So there you are. I wish we'd recorded it all. Really, it was like a sort of Little Britain sketch. But so there are people on the hard left of politics who are very embittered about life, and they can be very vitriolic. But I think you'll find that the sort of Marmite reputation I've got, I think you'll find the number of people who really think I'm a bad dude is a lot less than it was.
We often talk about how this election's different from 1997, don't we? Starmer's front bench isn't Blair's front bench. A lot lower calibre, I think most people would think. But how's the British electorate changed since 1997?
Yeah, I mean, Starmer is Blair without the flair himself, let alone who's on the front bench. Although at least Angela Rayner does have personality, which, she does. I mean, she makes me laugh anyway.
She may not be able to say nuclear without a run-up, but anyway.
No, but there's something actually quite real about her. I'm not saying I agree with anything.
Would you ask her out for a drink?
Oh, I think she'd be enormous fun. No, I'm being serious. I think she'd be enormous fun.
Should we arrange it?
I mean, probably outrageous. We'd probably end up getting kicked out the pub. It's different in many, many ways to 97, isn't it? I mean, there was that surge of enthusiasm for Blair. I mean, Blair was not just photogenic. He was very articulate. I mean, he could speak without notes. Blair didn't need a script. Blair knew exactly what the sort of new Labour philosophy was, and we can argue years on it didn't work, but there was a genuine sense of optimism. What I've been seeing is people are telling pollsters they'll vote Labour because they loathe the Tories so much.
The sort of spiral of silence idea, shy Tories, which happened in 92.
I don't believe any of that. No. Forget that. I mean, this is a journalistic story. Journalists and broadcasters have to believe there was going to be a tightening of the polls and it's going to be really, really exciting. Folks, it isn't. It's done. And those people that have left the Conservatives are not going back. That's what betrayal does. And that's how people feel. It's a sense of betrayal. They told us things in 2019 that not only have they not delivered, but they didn't really believe in them themselves in the first place, did they? So, no, the election's over. Labour have won. But I think turnout could be much lower than we've seen for some years, unsurprisingly.
It was the high 70s in 97. What could it be, 50?
55, 57. That's roughly where it would be. And I think that Reform now has a chance to start to dig into the Labour vote. We've kind of got it from the Conservative vote already, but I think we can start to bite into the Labour vote. And we're going to need to win these seats, which we're now in second place. And isn't this interesting? The Minister on the Today programme, if you vote Reform, you're voting for a Labour government, you'll split, all this stuff. Actually, and we'll go into polling more deeply in a moment, but if you take the YouGov poll of last week, already Reform is ahead of the Conservatives in the North East, the North West, Yorkshire and the Humber, the West Midlands and the East Midlands. It's ahead of the Conservatives in male voters. It's ahead of the Conservatives in terms of Brexit voters. Now, that's all very exciting, and it could lead to 300 second places, but we're going to have to dig hard. And I actually think a lot of that Labour vote's very soft. It doesn't really believe in Starmer. So that's the one thing that might change, but do not think for a minute that the Tories will recover. They're even talking this morning about Rishi resigning. as if a sixth leader is somehow going to inspire everybody. They're done. They're toast, and they thoroughly deserve it, in my view.
Something, Nigel, I am interested in asking you, because I do think that there are some really good Conservative MPs and former ministers. We've got people like Suella, Priti Patel, Carl McCartney up in Lincoln. We can all think of some really good people. It makes me uncomfortable that reform wouldn't stand down.
Oh, we've done all that before. I've had 25 years of doing them favours. 25 years of standing aside in elections for various members of Parliament. I did it in 97, did it in 01, did it in 05, did it in 10, did it, time and again. I've been running parties either as chairman or leader. We've not stood against the so-called good guys. Then in 2019, I stand aside in 319 seats. What have they ever given me?
There is speculation.
What have they ever? No chance.
No chance.
No chance. I'm saying rhetorically.
Yeah.
What have they ever done for me? And when it comes to it, even the good guys, it's party first. Always party. None of them have the guts, frankly, to stand up and do what's needed. And it's because most of them recognise that without the party, they're nothing.
Can you win seats under
Yes.
first past the post?
Yes, I mean,
Alongside Clacton?
Liam, it's devilishly tough.
Yeah, it is.
We've got three things against
UKIP
us.
came second in like 160 odd
That's
seats
right.
in
That's
2015, right?
It's devilishly tough for three reasons. Number one, polling industry is dishonest
Come on to that.
to the core. Number two, Ofcom are making life blooming difficult for us. And number three, the first past the post system. If I was leading a party like this in Italy, I'd be the Prime Minister. If I was in American politics, through open primaries, I could hijack the Conservative Party like my old friend did back in 2015 and 16. So I happen to find myself in the country I love in the most difficult of all positions. But I'll say this to you. In 2015, UKIP got 4 million votes and only one seat. We're going to get a lot more than 4 million votes. A lot more than 4 million votes. Of that, I'm absolutely, with all my years of experience.
You're going to get doubled, so you're going
and
to get 10 million
campaigning.
plus votes.
I don't know about 10. 10 would win the election. It's going to be a lot more than 4. So is it going to be 5.5, 6? Who knows? What I do know is, even under first past the post, there is a magic number. The Lib Dems go from 12 to 50 back to 12 because they go through that magic number. Now, can we do it? Can we get there? Clearly, time is very short. Had we had 6 months at this election, I could have been more confident in my predictions. I will say this. There is something going on out there. Momentum. Just yesterday at breakfast and through the day, millions of families were talking about reform and saying, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I've even met myself in the last couple of days, a huge number of long-term Tory voters who are still with them, but are kind of a little bit like this. What do we do? We are going to win seats. I think the real question is, can we win a significant number?
You've said that obviously you're attracting a lot of men over 50, lots of the Brexiteers and so on, which is great, but not so well amongst the women. Do you think there's a kind of blokish stuff that's off-putting, or do you think women are you're pulling a face.
I'm not, I'm laughing. You think I've come straight from the rugby club, don't you?
No,
You went home first, have a shower.
I see with female friends, there's just this slightly iffy hesitation. Perhaps it's because women are a bit more pragmatic. I would say there is no enthusiasm for voting for Labour at all amongst any of the Tory regions.
I've seen all this before. As UKIP rose, it was a very, very male-dominated vote. By the time UKIP got to where it got to, it wasn't. By the time we got to 2015-16, it was pretty even-steven. But in 2010, 11, 12, it was very male-dominated. That's much the same with Reform UK. Why? Very simple. Men are much more instinctive. Yep, like that, I'm going with it. Women are, hang on a sec. Women are much more thoughtful, much more cautious. Men, more animalistic.
But I haven't heard any pro-family policies. Are we going to see some of those?
Look at the Trevor Phillips interview that caused such uproar, where I made the point that women's participation in democratic life and politics is being put back 100 years. To see Angela Rayner sitting with Muslim constituents in her front room, begging them to vote for her. You have a look at what's happened in Burnley, in Bradford, in Leeds just a few weeks ago in the local elections. Big celebrations outside town halls. So I am making these arguments, and I think I perhaps need to make them even more powerfully as time goes on. I would also say this. One of the themes that we'll release next week, which will be our policy launch, and I won't call it manifesto, Because what's the word association with manifesto? Lie. I mean, it is. So we'll call it a contract. Because we're not going to govern. This election is not about who governs. That's over. It's about who the voice of opposition are really going to be. So we'll call it our contract. These will be the pledges of the things that we're going to campaign for the next 5 years. And one of the really big ones is education. Because I have had enough of the minds of our children being completely poisoned through education, with critical thinking, not being taught. And I think that may well appeal to women and female voters. There's another phenomenon here, which is interesting, and that's Gen Z. All those days with UKIP and the Brexit Party, we barely scratched the 16 to sort of 25-year-old, that bracket. We barely scratched it. We did a bit. But now there's something happening out there with those young people. Gen Z are rebelling. Their life chances are being diminished. I've done quite a few end-of-term cameo videos for Dear Mrs. Smith. After 2 years of teaching us politics, we haven't bought your indoctrination. Sort of messages like that. At the moment, amongst the youngsters, it's overwhelmingly male. Unlike my previous answer I gave about sort of, if you're 50, as a man, you'll come more quickly to it than a woman. And that's part of the phenomenon that saw Andrew Tate get his popularity, unsavoury though much of his life may be. It's kind of, we're telling young blokes they can't be young blokes. You can't chant at football matches. You're not supposed to have more than 2 pints of beer. I mean, give it a break. I mean, it's like we're sort of feminising young men, and they're beginning to rebel against.
And Starmer said on the D-Day commemoration, said, all the young men and women running up the beaches.
Yeah,
and you thought, actually, this is diversity gone mad, isn't it? Because women, of course, played an enormous role in the Second World War.
Yeah, they did.
In planning and in munitions. But there were not women running up the beaches. And what I thought as a mother of a son was, don't do down the raw masculinity and courage that it took. They just got out of those boats. They were 18, 19. And I thought the white working class boys now, Nigel, I mean, I don't have to tell you this, they are among the most scorned and neglected, aren't they?
I have to say with Dida, I was very, very proud to be part of a fundraising effort. We sent 17 veterans back with the money that I helped the London Taxi Charity raise. 17 who couldn't have gone because they couldn't have afforded it. And that's the reason I was there. Yeah. But Starmer was there, and right that he was. But of course, unless I've got this wrong, is that the same Keir Starmer who wore his poppy for a press appearance and then went to meet a Muslim group and took the poppy off? Would that be the same chap? I mean, perhaps I've got it mistaken. I don't know. I mean, what do any of these people actually believe in?
Well, that brings us, doesn't it, Liam, to this debacle with the Prime Minister absenting himself from the final phase of that. I mean,
and let's just remind everybody, this was, the Canadians had one beach, the British had 2 beaches, the Americans had 2 beaches. And this, the Omaha Beach ceremony, well, the reason it was Omaha Beach was that was where the Americans took huge casualties. And if they hadn't got off the beach at the end of that day, the Allies would have been split. The whole thing could have turned into, Gallipoli times 2 and been a complete disaster. So there it was, world leaders, significant world leaders there, and veterans, not just British veterans, but the American veterans were there, the Canadian veterans were there, and this was the big event. And he chose not to go. And then he said it was a mistake. No, it can't be a mistake. Because if you felt it in your heart and you understood actually where people in this country are about this sort of thing, you never, ever would have made that decision.
But you have been criticised, haven't you, for saying that was the action or lack of action of an unpatriotic man, and people alleging that was a sort of a bit of a dog whistle. Do you see any kind of credence in that at all?
Well, of course they're going to say that. Of course they're going to say that. But, this bloke was born in this country. That's the first point to make. Second point to make is 40% of all our efforts in World War I and World War II came from Commonwealth countries. So there are plenty of Commonwealth families here who've got real connections emotionally with those events. No, this is Winchester, Oxford, Goldman Sachs, bit nerdy, and with no connection with ordinary folk.
Allison's quite nerdy these days. Be careful.
Yeah, he has no sense. And the word they had a go at me for was culture. But actually, I think part of our culture is, when we look back at our history, World War II is the proudest piece of history of everything we've ever done. And the fact that we had these last remnants of that generation still left made last week a very special moment in time. He didn't understand that.
Liam was actually tearing up, weren't we? We were talking about it earlier and you got very emotional.
Yeah, I do. And, my people were digging spuds in Ireland at the time, but they weren't. And that's the point, because, of course, there were many Irish people involved in the Second World War.
Yeah.
Let's just deal with the nuts and bolts of the election, because these mechanics are important. You said you're upset at the polling companies. You said you're upset at Ofcom. So with the polling companies, what's your beef with them?
Mail on Sunday yesterday, Reform was on 12%. Nothing to worry about here. Please don't vote Reform. It's a wasted vote. You've got a couple of polling companies who are not prompting.
There's no box to tick that's Reform.
So how will you vote in the election? Labour, Lib Dem, Conservative, Green, other. People don't offer all the things that aren't on the menu.
When you're polling above two of those parties, and you could be about to poll above the Tories as well.
Generally, people order what's on the menu. So then if you press the box of other, you're given a list as long as your arm. The Women's Equality Party, blah-de-blah-de-blah. That's trick one. Trick two is the undecideds get reweighted back to the result of the 2019 general election. We weren't in it. So this is utterly deceptive and deceitful. And, all right, you could say naivety, but it's not. I know why the Mail on Sunday published that number. All right? So what I've done, I've written to the British Polling Council. I've said that this, frankly, is as close to corruption as you can get. Polls can be wrong, and I get that. But if we're willfully misleading the great British public at a general election, there's something seriously wrong there. I've not heard back from them. But all I will say, Liam, is I took on the banks last year, and if the British Polling Council want to fight, well, and I haven't got any right.
And Nigel Farage is literally taking his jacket off.
So if you prompt,
Yeah.
we're on 16-17.
Yeah.
And the Tories are
And
on
that might encourage more to vote for you.
Exactly. And the Tories are on 19-20. We are way behind the Tories in London. We are way behind the Tories in Scotland. Right? If you take that out, we're ahead of the Tories.
If there's Starmer and Sunak, and you're polling above Sunak, are you saying it should be Starmer and you?
Or Starmer, me and Sunak. That's fine. Oh, I'd love to debate both of them. It'd be enormous fun. And the other problem is Ofcom. Ofcom have given guidance to the broadcasters that you need to use a combination of the last two general elections and current polling numbers. So I know on good authority that GB News, they haven't told me this, but staff there have, GB News have to allocate 8% of the election to Reform. So we've got everything against us in so many ways, and yet it's still happening.
After, indeed, the Friday BBC debate, you came easily on top of a Telegraph poll, and then there was a Snap YouGov poll which you also topped. But honestly, Nigel, listening to the reaction of the studio audience, you wouldn't have known you were making any popular points that were resonating with people.
I'm used to BBC audiences, but that one was really quite extraordinary. And how the cameraman, after each of my answers, managed to find the same bald bloke in the front row shaking his head's beyond me. Look, this is why it's so difficult to get real change in this country. Everything's designed to keep the system exactly as it is.
How are your erstwhile enemies in the Brexit debate going to respond to the results from the continent over the weekend? Where you had big gains for AfD in Germany, you had big gains in Sweden, Belgium, but France. Did you really expect Marine Le Pen to poll twice what Macron polled?
She got exactly the same result in percentage terms that we got in the Brexit Party in 2019, interestingly.
31, 32%.
Yeah, that's right. When she's in the Elysee, which she will be. I've said for 15 years she'll be the French president. And every French presidential election she gets another 5%.
Do you like her?
Do I like her? Didn't like her dad. Her dad was a proper old-fashioned chauvinist. He was proper Chauvin, although I did admire watching him at lunch in the members' dining room at Strasbourg, where he'd be surrounded by very pretty, much, much younger French girls. And the waiter could barely get the corks out of the wine bottle quickly enough. But no, he was terrible politically and very anti-British. Very, very. A sort of hint of Vichy still. Yeah, I make no bones about it. I do like Marine. Economically, she's so left-wing, it's almost unbelievable. I think she'd be terrible as far as the French economy is concerned, but I think she'll be president. The snap election that he's called, well, very interesting. Of course, he will reason that the French have a knockout and then a first-past-the-post ballot. And he'll reason that Marine will be in almost every single two-way runoff, but lose most of them because all the other parties will coalesce. But we'll see. We'll see.
How about AfD? You look at their policy platform.
They're a mess.
Are they a mess strategically, or in Nigel Farage's view, are their policies too chauvinistic, to use a word?
They're just all over the place. They've never had any firm leadership. There's never really been a dominant figure in the AfD saying, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do that. It's always been a little bit lander by lander. In Germany, they do their own things. Their lead candidate for the European elections was kicked off the list for corruption.
Yeah, Max Krah.
Yeah, and frankly, deservedly so. So I've always had a very mixed feeling about AfD. But look, they're there. They're Eurosceptic. They're on the rise. If they sort the mess out, they might become an enormous party. And of course, in the East, they already are. Generally, across the whole of the continent, Euroscepticism is on the rise. You mentioned a list of countries earlier where things are changing. Even Donald Tusk, he's now the Prime Minister of Poland. He's now
EU apparat.
Well, I used to give him a hell of a tough time.
Yeah.
Poor old chap used to shake like a leaf when he met me, even he sounds like I did 10 years ago. There's a big shift going on. And you're right, the lovey-loveys of the Lib Dems and everybody else, they will not want to join what the EU is becoming.
It's almost worth seeing this Keir Starmer victory, because I think they've got some tete-a-tete with the French arranged for shortly after our general election. So that's going to be marvellous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Marine meets Keir. Nigel, you've called this election in the UK the immigration election, which I agree with. So how much were those results in Europe? Was that that was the result of
both
growing tensions about immigration?
Immigration, obviously, and culture, but also Brussels. What were the farmers' protests about? The farmers' protests were about Brussels saying you can do, you have to do this, you have to do that. And wasn't it funny, when Macron went to meet the French farmers, when they blocked the 8 main roads into Paris, what did Macron say to them? Listen, guys, don't panic, I'm off to Brussels. Almost an admission that the sovereignty didn't even lay with the French president or the French Assembly. And I think, so I do think the farmers' protests have bred a very new strain of Euroscepticism in Europe. Everyone's afraid to say they should leave. One of the reasons for that is most of them are in the euro. That makes leaving a lot more, not impossible, but a lot more complicated. I'm as certain as I've ever been that the European project is ill-conceived, that it will never, ever work out the way they want it to, and will probably end very badly.
A reform policy which I do take some issue with and I'm a bit confused about is this net zero immigration, so-called, which Richard Tice has mentioned, which seems to be one in, one out. How is that going to resolve this vast influx now, which we're seeing, which, according to Migration Watch, is going to lead to massive, absolutely ineradicable change in the makeup of our country in the next 40 years?
It's almost done that already. In many parts of our cities are now frankly unrecognisable, with a very different culture that's taken hold, and one in which women, getting back to that point, will do very badly, I'm afraid. Net migration is running at 750,000 a year. The British population increases by 750,000 a year as a result of migration. The population has risen since David Cameron came to power, and over 2/3 of that directly down to people coming to live in Britain. Fascinatingly, of that net migration figure, over 50% are dependents. Over 50% are not an economic benefit to the country, the opposite. And this is where it becomes easier for me to talk about these things. People now realise it's not making us richer, it's actually making us poorer. It's making one or two giant multinationals richer because they can pay people as little money as they possibly want. I think the penny is dropping on housing. Rents are up between 20 and 30% since 2021 in various parts of the country, and even the Institute for Fiscal Studies, have said recently, actually, you know what, there's one big factor here. So there is, and that's why it should be the immigration election. What we're saying is this: people will always leave, but in fact, with the current tax structure, they're leaving in ever faster numbers. The wealthy ones go to Dubai, the young entrepreneurs go to Lisbon or Milan, and that's been happening and accelerating for the last couple of years. And of course, we're not literally a barbed wire, under the white cliffs of Dover. Of course, we understand that in international business, people will come on work permits, and so we're saying we're very happy with people coming in and going out. We just think overall the number should be zero. We should halt population growth, because we can talk about the cultural problems, sectarian voting, stuff like that. The real problem that affects the biggest number of people is the population explosion. Tony Blair, New Labour, started this. The Conservatives have accelerated this. And I find it hard to listen to Conservative ministers in debate with a party of low tax and low migration. It's a level of dishonesty I can barely cope with.
Liam and I have often talked about this, really, is where ministers have lost power to use the levers. So Suella Braverman said to me that when she was saying to Rishi, we absolutely have to bring these numbers down. And she said, Jeremy Hunt and Rishi said, basically, if we bring the number coming in down by as many as you want, we'll knock 3 billion off GDP. The OBR won't let us make tax cuts. Are these quangos exercising undemocratic power over the ability for the British people to have what they want to see enacted?
Liz Truss had a point. Well, let's face it, Liz Truss did have a point. It may have been the way the budget was constructed, it may have been ill-conceived, it may have been poorly delivered, but she did have a point. I mean, two things here. One, we bow down to the god of GDP. What about GDP per capita? It fell 0.7% in the last year.
It's fallen for all 6 of the last quarters.
Yeah, I mean, extraordinary. So we're getting poorer. Through the Treasury and through OBR, keep pumping in new people into Britain. So the whole model's bust. It doesn't work. And these are the kind of arguments, that I want to lead on a national level for the next 5 years until the country susses out just how blooming awful Labour are. In one way, I'm quite optimistic. I think the Labour Party will have no honeymoon at all. Liam mentioned earlier the lack of talent, real life experience and talent on the front bench, and I agree with that. And there's no reason for this to be more than a one-term Labour government. But the centre-right's got to sort itself out. And if that means the extinction of the 190-year-old Conservative Party, so be it. Or it might mean something else.
Net zero, is it still a net vote winner? The Overton window's shifting on immigration. It seems to me it's shifting on net zero too. In the past, you've said you want to see a referendum on net zero.
Yes.
Do you still want that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always felt that the reason for a referendum on it, Liam, was, again, no choice. Everyone signed up to it. I mean, that extraordinary piece of legislation that Theresa May passed, probably of itself the most expensive piece of financial legislation in British parliamentary history. There's almost no debate. Nodded through, because everybody agrees. So I did talk about a referendum. I mean, I'm more radical than that. And I actually think we should have the right, as the Swiss people do, if we feel our entire parliament is out of touch on a major issue, I think we should be able to call a referendum on something that ought to be, in that situation, legally binding. And that would need a constitutional change. And I understand all of that. I mean, if you can show me green, reliable technology that produces regular, not intermittent energy without subsidy, I mean, I'm in. I'll invest in it. No, but I mean it. But nobody can show me that. No one can show me that. And the reality is we're going to be using oil and gas for the next 30 years, at least. We saw Chevron leaving the North Sea after 60 years. So the levels of super tax that the Tories are charging on this, let alone what Labour might do. And so we're finishing up. I mean, we will not be a primary producer of steel. That's gone to meet carbon targets, etc. So we are literally deindustrialising in order to meet carbon targets, and therefore all we do is export our CO2 emission. This is not the easiest conversation with young people. It's not, because they literally have not been taught any critical thinking on this at all. But you know me, I make arguments whether they're popular at the time or not popular at the time, and I will go on doing that. And I think it's a bigger vote winner in the Netherlands right now than it is here, but it's coming here too.
You've talked about the paucity of candidates and Labour. I mean, look at Reform. We've had some slightly dubious characters being thrown up in the recent process, including one unnamed gentleman who suggested that we should have had a policy of neutrality with Hitler.
Well, he should have been in the cabinet in 1938, because half of them thought that. The Daily Mail thought that. He's a bit out of date. Look, we have not had time. We've not had time to do the job. The Greens have got 20 candidates they're about to suspend. All right? And you'll find Tories and Labour, these embarrassments will come all through the election. For us, it's been uniquely difficult. Reform is a very new party without much of a structure, and there'll be a few embarrassments. You know what? The vast majority of them are decent people, non-political, who've got a range of jobs in the real world. I'm proud that they're part of the People's Army.
If you get into Parliament in Clacton, you are going to have to work with the Conservative Party. Which Conservative leader would you most like to work with?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. And it's impossible to speculate because they could all lose their seats.
Come on.
There are ones I like.
Names?
what's this? I mean, it's a Gestapo interrogation. I mean, give me a glass of wine, I might tell you. There are people that are friends of mine in that party, Pretty, David Davis. I get on very well with Jacob, indeed. I mean, I like Suella. There are people like that, of course, that I like. But you've got to understand, they're a tiny minority in the parliamentary party. A tiny minority. And nobody can quite tell, but probably the bigger the drubbing, the more One Nationers will be there.
The more likely they will be to elect a One Nation leader from the left of the party.
Yeah, good. We can finish them off then. Good.
So even though the activist base of Tories would want somebody from the right of the party.
Well, then they'll all come to reform. And we'll reshape the right.
So you'd like a dripping wet so that then you could eat them for breakfast, is that right?
I'm saying I have no idea how this is going to play out. But that looks to me to be the most likely.
What we have seen in the local elections, which Liam and I have obviously been following the last 11, the by-elections, is the Labour vote, a huge number of Conservatives staying home. That's been the biggest effect. So a lot of them sitting on their hands, while the Labour vote, like in Wellingborough, where Ben Habib, who we admire, the Labour vote, I think, went up by about 103 votes. So we're not seeing a huge Starmer surge, are we? What are your fears for this undeserved Starmer majority, I would say?
Well, my fears are there'll just be a shambles, complete shambles. I mean, not much will change to begin with because the policies are identical. I mean, isn't it funny? Tax and spend, they're identical. No, you're going to put taxes up £2,000. You're going to put them up £3,000. The whole thing's unbelievable. Debt doesn't even get mentioned. Debt repayment of 90 billion a year, exactly the same as the education budget. And it's just, there's no honest debate. So on economics, on many areas, there'll be no difference. They'll be a bit worse. I think the VAT on private schools is one they might come to regret fairly quickly. Not good policy. Am I worried they're going to be extreme radical left? Not really. What would worry me is a narrow majority. If he only had a 50 majority, we could be genuinely scared that the sort of Corbynite wing of the party, I mean, that Diane Abbott's back, So I don't think we're going to see great change. I think what we'll see, Allison, is continued decline. And that decline is economic because we're doing better than Europe. But
You said we're skint.
Well, we are skint when it comes to the national. I mean, look at the extent to which national debt has increased. Oh, don't blame us, blame the pandemic. Hang on, matey. You didn't have to lock us down again and again. And you could have actually...
We were close to 80-90% of GDP national debt before the pandemic.
Yeah, we've got up 7 or 8 pips because of it. But, Also, Liam, here's a very important point. This bloke Rishi is supposed to be good with numbers. He could have locked in the interest rate of that 400 billion worth of debt.
Well, some of us wrote that at the time.
No, I know, and I do. I always read your stuff,
But you were advocating it too.
I know.
A lot of us in journalism who are financially literate, and there's so few, were saying, why don't you lock in loads of debt now?
When base rates are 0.5%, and now they've been up in the meantime to over 5%. So...
But Liam's just asking you, because Liam's often said that if the markets took umbrage, things could unravel quite quickly. Is that a possibility?
I think given that we've now got debt, we'll get very technical here, but confidence is that completely indefinable thing about all forms of money. And when confidence goes, I did a press conference this morning with Richard Tice about this, and I made the point, that selling bonds can't always be taken for granted because life's... So I think we'll go on in economic decline in terms of we will get relatively poorer. I think we're in social decline. I think law and order, the fact you can go shoplifting now to up to 200 quid and not get a and not be prosecuted and convicted is astonishing. A surrender. The surrender on the streets of London is just incredible. These foreign gangs on mopeds going around nicking mobile phones or putting machetes out on people for their watches. And I think we're in moral decline. I think you have to understand what the Judeo-Christian bases and principles of the entirety of our civilization in the West are all about. And I think we are losing a sense of who we are, what we are. It's kind of why the D-Day thing meant so much last week, because it was a reminder actually of what service, of what values were, of what giving up things in life to help others. And these are, if you think about it, actually very, very Christian principles. And we're bringing up our kids to, well, we teach kids at school about every religion in the world apart from Christianity. That's the first point to make. And then we tell our kids that we are uniquely responsible for slavery. We are one of the worst countries that were ever born. And we tell them that because of white privilege, little Johnny who's aged 8 is an oppressor. And this is leading to a moral decline.
There was that devastating survey, wasn't there, that over 50% of British young people didn't know what D-Day was. And I got a message from a reader who said her mother, a German vicar who had grown up in Germany as a little child during the war, had been teaching a primary school class in England what D-Day was. What do we do about that, Nigel?
Leadership. We're told Mr. Gove's done a great job with education. Has he? Those figures don't bear that out, do they? We've had self-loathing coming from the Labour Party in those Blair and Brown years about who we are in our history. All the Tories have done is to continue it. What we should be doing is teaching kids that the whole world's practiced slavery since the dawn of time, and it's still going on today on the most astonishing scale. But there is one country that spent more of its tax money, spent more of its income stamping out slavery than it ever earned from it. How about that? How about teaching our kids that? It's not happening. But with the right leadership, it would.
Talking to lots of friends and readers and so on, people are, I think, hungry for a vision. I think there's a tremendous amount of negativity. Can you see a positive way forward?
I can, in one sense. That, I'm old enough to remember the mid-1970s, and I'm old enough to remember sort of Sunday lunch type conversations with grandparents who were Victorians. First World War people, not second. And this kind of sense that the country had gone to the dogs, but it kind of had. Inflation peaking at 27, 28%, 3-day week. We were the sick man of Europe going down the tubes. And you know what? We turned it round. And with a vision and with courage, with ideas, you can turn it round. And I believe we can turn this round. And this is why I'm so encouraged by what I'm seeing with Gen Z. I'm so encouraged there is a new younger cohort that are different to the millennials, frustrated, but they're ambitious. They turn up, they look smart, and we can turn this around. There is one longer-term problem that'll be more difficult, and that is, I'm afraid, the roots that radical Islam has got among young British-born Muslims. And I don't know why or how this has happened, but that will be a much more difficult thing. Can we turn it round? Yes, but we have to recognise one thing, that Western societies don't function, Western societies don't prosper unless you let individuals go out, work hard, make money. It actually works. And if we don't get money, we don't make money, we don't have growth, we're in for a grim future.
One last question from me. Nigel Farage, are you the Messiah or just a very naughty boy?
No, I had this on Saturday, an old boy, a proper old EastEnder, proper Cockney type, he must have been 80. He says, that star that everyone fought over, you are that star. Well, do you know what is interesting? Is that most people who want to vote for me are not doing so as a protest. This is not an FU. No, they're voting for me because they actually believe I've got the courage to face up to the problems and turn things around.
Are you that change person who rescued us from the 70s? Are you the equivalent of Margaret Thatcher?
I don't know. You never do you? You can never tell until you go and try and do it. But if you're asking me, am I going to try? Yes.
Nigel Farage, thanks a lot for appearing on Planet Normal.
Thank you.
I have to say, Allison, we live in a world where political interviews are increasingly shoehorned into tiny time slots. I mean, remember that ITV debate? How do you solve all the problems of the world? You got 10 seconds, right? You and I sat down with somebody who is obviously unusually good at talking, very discursive, and there's an extended interview there. I think that is what the British public wants. It wants to hear proper, no-holds-barred conversations with politicians without gotcha questions, just trying to understand who they are and where they're coming from and what they wanted to do. And whatever you think of Nigel Farage, whether he is your cup of tea or not, I think what we just did there was a useful service for our election and for democracy.
He's an absolute delight to interview because he's extremely practiced. We know from his programme on GB News how fluent he is. In fact, Cass, our producer, worked closely with him and she said he's never phased. I mean, Nigel's never going to be umming and ahhing, and he doesn't talk in those terrible political platitudes, what George Orwell famously described in his great essay, Politics in the English Language, as prefabricated sections of a chicken coop. I mean, we're getting a lot of prefabricated sections of a chicken coop at the moment, aren't we? But he listens to the question and he answers it. And what I find so persuasive is he is not afraid to go after the sacred cows. And we saw in his excellent performance, actually, in the Friday BBC debate, and also just talking to us now, just a willingness to talk about things like debt, Liam. We're skint.
Indeed.
Which of the other politicians, they're all talking about, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut taxes, no, you're not, we're skint. He's prepared to talk in language that people understand. He's prepared to stand up and say, the NHS can't go on like this. We've got to do something about immigration because of all the pressures it brings. And I thought it was interesting that Nigel did say he has been a very Marmite figure. At the top of the interview, I quoted my friend who had said to her kids that she was going to vote Reform, and the son said, "Oh, I always thought you're a bit of a racist, mum." Now, that's an allegation that hangs around, in the sort of saloon bar smoke in which Nigel Farage exists. But I think Nigel is correct that aura is being dissipated a bit, as I think people are prepared to hear, that we have to have these conversations, that it's just not possible to go on with these stupefying numbers coming in. It cannot be racist to talk about that. It cannot be far right to express the concerns of the ordinary person, which I think Nigel does peerlessly.
Indeed. I mean, I've left GB News now, Allison, as you know, and I may say more about that at some stage in the future. But one of the things that really struck me at GB News was Nigel's broadcasting ability. I've got a certain reputation in the TV news industry as being able to walk into a studio and talk about anything for as long as you want. Funnily enough.
Who knew the co-pilot could roll out?
And presenting without auto cue and so on. Let me say this, and this is coming from me. I've never been in a TV studio with a more natural broadcaster. No auto cue, which is an astonishing thing when you're talking about a complex TV news show with many, many different facets. Just a few notes on a piece of paper, and he can do it off the top of his head. And that is a rare, rare skill. And it winds up other politicians because almost to a man and woman, they can't do it. And I must say that it seems that Nigel Farage, even though there's a big majority in Clacton for the incumbent Tory, who's a very respected local man, and also the Reform candidate that Nigel has big-footed or biffed, as we say in the media industry, out of the way so he can be the Reform candidate. He's standing as an independent, and he's also a pretty popular, well-respected local man. So it's not as if Nigel's got a clear run, but it does seem that he will win anyway. And I say again, if he wins and he gets in Parliament, it is literally going to be the fox in the Tory chicken coop. And he is going to be there as a magnet for Tory MPs on the right of the party. If they don't get their way in the coming leadership election, if the parliamentary party doesn't put forward at least one candidate of the right, the MPs choose two, of course, then it goes to the party in the country, the activists, the membership to decide the leader. If the left of the Tory party post-election puts forward two One Nation candidates, there will be big defections from the right of the Tories to Nigel Farage's Reform Party. So even if Reform just get one seat on the night, which much of the media will celebrate, so completely irrelevant. Even the Greens got one seat, Caroline Lucas. That will be just the beginning, not the end, of Reform's representation in this coming Parliament.
But they hate him, Liam. They hate him. And it reminds me a lot of that Brexit period when, you were treated by, if you thought we should leave the European Union, you were regarded as a bit of a bad smell in an elevator. I'll be honest, I was disappointed. I asked him, would he stand down Reform candidates in, say, the constituencies of Suella Braverman, Miriam Cates, Robert Jenrick, Danny Kruger, Jacob Rees-Mogg, indeed, in Somerset, where Jacob's going to have a fight on his hands.
And they're really good mates, by the way,
yeah.
Nigel and Jacob. On GB News, their shows were literally one after the other.
They spent ages together in the newsroom.
But let's be honest, Liam. Now, Nigel said privately off air that, he's come in a hurry. He's declared that he was going to be running, only very, very recently. He's come in. There's not a lot of money. There's quite a lot of disorganisation. We've already had a few reform candidates being called to account for some very unsavoury social media posts. Not that other parties don't also have candidates making unsavoury social media posts, but it strikes me that it's just cutting your nose off to spite your face to allow some actually genuinely talented Conservatives of the right to potentially lose their seats to, let's face it, some not exceptional reform candidates. I mean, not saying they haven't got good candidates. Obviously, we've got Ben Habib and Richard Tice, and, there are some very good people standing around the country, but we could hear the anger in his voice, couldn't we? He has been shafted by the Conservative Party. He owes them nothing.
I agree. I mean, there are lots and lots of news lines in that interview, as we say in the trade. And we especially went into the Telegraph, didn't we, to conduct the interview together. And we very rarely record Planet Normal podcasts together just because we're often in different places. And the Telegraph immediately picked up and publicised Nigel Farage wanting to, quote, gate crash the leaders' debate. Why should it be Sunak and Starmer if Reform are actually ahead of the Tories in the polls?
Yeah.
I thought that was a very good line. But I thought the really telling point in the interview was exactly as you say, in response to your prompting, your admission of your own internal dilemma about this and your disapproval of his kind of scorched earth Tory policy. And that's coming from you. And you've been vehemently angry at the Tories for a long time. And you've been predicting their demise for much, much longer, I think, than almost any other commentator, certainly when it comes to 100 seats or below. His response to that, you could describe it as passionate, angry, visceral. No way, as we just heard on the recording. Because that's very interesting, because some commentators, some politicians were trying to say that there was a wedge growing between Richard Tice, who's been leading the Reform Party up until now, who's absolutely vehemently no deal ever. I'm not doing it. And he's been saying that to me for 2 years. And Farage, maybe because he's done deals with the Tories in the past, he might do another deal when he comes to it. That was a major opportunity, Allison, on this podcast, which is hugely followed among political journalists and so on. To you, you said, come on, Nigel, do a bit of a deal. And I wouldn't say he was angry at you. He wasn't. The atmosphere in the room was still, conversational, but passionate in his voice, like a man who'd been scorned so many times. And this time, he's not to be scorned.
We are entering, though, I would admit that I feel uneasy because, we speak as if we have some certainty about what's going to happen. We are in uncharted waters now, Liam. If the Conservatives lose as many seats as we think they will, then all bets are off. And I admire a lot of what Nigel says. I agree with a lot of what he says. I don't like the Trump stuff. I just don't. That's part of him that I can't go along with. And there's just a kind of slight hesitation. So I'm in a constituency where Kemi Badenoch is the MP, and I will vote for her because she is one of the Conservatives I consider to be have been brave, principled, business-minded. I don't see the case for punishing all Conservative MPs for the faults of the centre-left, who I don't even consider to be Conservatives anyway. So I think the big question is, as we're recording, these astonishing polls are coming out in the Telegraph. A quarter of people who voted Tory in 2019 say the party deserves to lose all its seats. Nearly half of all voters think the Tories deserve to implode. Now, this is kind of Armageddon, but what is it going to mean in practice? All right, what is it going to mean in practice having this vast, overbearing government? And come polling day, how many former Tory voters will hold their nose and vote Conservative because they do not want to gift Labour that stonking majority? Or how many will, as many of our readers and listeners say, are so ticked off, so done with them for the serial betrayal? So will the scorned wife reluctantly take back the erring husband? Or, will she shut the door and put on Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive?
Now, in that interview, I mentioned something called the spiral of silence, which is when people say they're not going to vote Tory, but they do. And that phrase, as we'll remember, emerged after the 92 election, and because the polls all said Kinnock would beat Major, and in the end, Major beat Kinnock, because in the end, people went into the polling booth and they thought Kinnock would put taxes up too much. And even though they didn't like the Tories, they felt it was time for a change. After all those years since 1979, they voted Tory anyway. I mentioned that, and Nigel knocked it down with attitude, which is fine. It's an interview. It's discursive. I didn't mind. And I wasn't going to gainsay him then because we had so many things to talk about. But even though he is one of the canniest political analysts I've ever met, let alone operator, let alone sort of frontman performer, he's all those things. I do think he may be proved a bit wrong on that. And I would defer to you on this. I do think a lot of people, particularly a lot of women who would be natural conservatives, are thinking, God, they're awful, but can I really vote for Nigel Farage? They might tell a pollster they're angry at the Tories and they want them to be wiped out. But when it comes to it, in the privacy of the polling booth, will they, as you say, hold their nose and vote Tory? Now, I think there is a bit of that. It's not nearly enough to mean that Sunak's within a sniff of winning the election or even denying Labour a majority. But I do think that downplaying of votes for the Tories is baked into the polls to at least some degree. Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We'll love to read your thoughts. We learn so much from you, especially Allison, the citizens of Planet Normal.
You won't give up on that, will you? Me nicking.
It's not that I don't learn things. It's just I don't then put them in my column.
That's why I'm a novelist and you're not, matey. Right.
Ooh, I'm a primate with a typewriter.
Yeah, exactly. This is from Kit. I read Allison's column on disillusioned Tories voting reform and was saddened and disappointed. Let me say that I agree with much of what she wrote, and I'm angry at how the Conservatives have governed. The internecine war that has raged in the party has made it impossible for anyone to run a country. Rishi Sunak should never have been made Prime Minister, and I blame the cabal that wanted him there at any cost. Short-sighted in the extreme, says Kit. I'm a lifelong Conservative, will always vote Conservative. I'm not a John Major, David Cameron, Theresa May or Rishi Sunak Conservative. I am a Margaret Thatcher Conservative. Think of what the late lady would say if she was told that Conservatives were deserting for a new party. No, no, no. The former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, was right. He said, when the going gets tough, you don't cut and run, you stay and change things from inside. So apparently numerous Conservatives are going to vote for reform. I'm intrigued. We know that Labour are favourites to win the election, and voting reform will simply lose seats for the Conservatives and increase that Labour majority. What could reform achieve, though? 3, 4, even 10 seats? I agree with Farage about a lot, apart from his stance on Trump. Me too, Kit. He's now sounding like the man at the bottom of Downing Street who bellows about Brexit. I think Ben Habib is excellent. I could listen to him all day. Despite the sad state of politics and the calibre of MPs, I'm heartened by a few. Rosie Duffield, not Conservative, but a quality human being. A quality human being, exactly.
Apologise to Rosie Duffield, Keir Starmer.
Yeah, apologise to Rosie Duffield, you duffer.
There's a headline in that.
So I will vote Conservative again, says Kit, but with far more reluctance than ever. I won't be waiting up for the results and expect misery in the 5 years to come. I will, however, still look forward to Planet Normal on Thursdays. Yeah, we're all going to have to hold hands through this dark times. Yes.
I'm taking up yoga.
God.
Or maybe yogic flying in an appeal to marginal parties. Do you remember that Natural Law Party?
Yes, I do. Actually,
I never forget, I saw yogic flying on a party election broadcast in sort of 1974. I literally went to the library to look out. Is this really a thing?
The idea of getting you off the ground for yogic flying is a bit ambitious, Halligan.
Yogic hoisting.
Yogic hoisting, yeah, exactly.
This is from James. A fine name. My middle name, actually. Regarding Labour's plans on school fees and VAT. There's a forced circle of silence, says James, i.e. only when a school's going to close can they give an insight into their finances. As soon as an independent says they'll not be able to operate with 20% VAT on school fees, that is the end of it. Parents will move their children preemptively to protect them from a school closure. I'm sure there will be hundreds of schools on the brink which will go under if VAT is imposed, but who are clutching at straws in the hope that the policy will not go through. Labour have absolutely no idea how the finances of most independent schools look today, utterly blind, and from a government's perspective, stupid, says James. One point rarely made is that parents sending their children to independent schools are already paying for their child's education in the state system through income tax. This is subsidising the education system by not taking the benefit up, i.e. a school of 1,000 pupils has 7% or around 70 pupil spaces in theory, which would be taken by children if they're not being educated independently. If half those pupils took up their places, which over 4 years I think is possible, given the number of schools which could close or parents that can't afford the fees, says James, the budget for educating those extra children in the state system isn't going to change. There are 610,000 children in the independent education. If 100,000 or 17% move to the state system, that's 100,000 times £7,000. That's £700 million cost of educating them. That's almost half the revenue Labour is saying they'll get from VAT. It also means that the parents of 100,000 pupils won't be paying VAT on, for argument's sake, 30,000 annual fees. That's 30,000 times 20%. £6,000 times 100,000 is another 600 million, says James. On these two metrics alone, Labour's just lost much of the money it plans to raise from VAT. James, it's a very interesting email, and I'm not sure that this policy won't go through. I think it will go through, but I do agree with you that there will be at least some flow, possibly a sizable flow of pupils from the independent sector that the state will then have to educate.
I think it's an absolutely ruinous and cruel policy. And Liam, I wanted to press you because you came up with, I know I'm praising you too much this week, but what was that statement about ideology? We had Keir Starmer in the debate with Sunak saying, even if a member of his family was ill, he would never go private. What a kind of astonishing. And you said something about ideology, which is what they're prisoners of, isn't it? What was your thought on ideology?
I'm getting worried about all this praise. What do you mean by this? What have I done? What's going to happen?
You said something very good there about ideology.
Go on then. So what I said, I think we were on the tube at the time.
We were.
I think what I said is that ideology is often an excuse for ignoring uncomfortable realities, inconvenient realities. Ideology is often a substitute for thought and analysis and a realization that events have moved on. I don't like ideology. I don't like tribal party politics either. And I think a lot of the British electorate doesn't either. I think the word ideology is completely outdated and discredited.
And this is a victim of the ideology of the Labour Party. Emily says, "Dear Allison and Liam, slightly unwisely, I'm writing this at 2 a.m, having found myself lying awake, my traitorous mind flitting between all the nonsensical claptrap we're hearing on a daily basis. I'm driven to force my thoughts into text," says Emily, "by the realization that very soon we will be governed by a party who consider me and my family the enemy. My children go to private school, something we can only just afford. The local state system having let down my 8-year-old daughter very badly. We always suspected she had dyslexia. This was recently confirmed. But her previous school simply wouldn't engage with that possibility, saying she wasn't far enough behind the other children for them to have any concerns. The criteria for advancing to the reading comprehension class was being able to read a certain number of words in a very short time, something that doesn't really suit a dyslexic child. Thus, our daughter was treated like she was stupid, not dyslexic. She became depressed. School was boring and pointless. And for a bright child, that is a problem. And yes, says Emily, I have just finished reading Lionel Shriver's Brilliant Mania. I did my best, but I'm her mother, not her teacher. Thus, she is now at an independent school having a wonderful time. She comes home enthused about her schoolwork. This would have been unthinkable a year ago. I don't want to criticise the teachers too much. They were dealt an extremely bad hand throughout COVID, and dealing with all the fallout has been especially hard. My daughter slipped through the cracks because although in the end they did admit that she was probably behind where she should be, she was by no means a problem child. The behavioural issues amongst her classmates were in some cases extreme: bullying, 7-year-olds throwing chairs at windows. And this is a sleepy village school in the West Country rated outstanding. Obviously, my decision to do what I can to help my daughter and not risk the same happening to my son, the family foregoes holidays and treats, makes me a target for Labour's classist policies. Our next Prime Minister says he wouldn't even entertain the idea of seeking swift private medical care for a member of his family. Ideology clearly trumps logic in his mind. I pity Keir Starmer's family. I've been meaning to email you for a while, Emily says, but I felt that many of your other listeners are more adept at pinpointing the madness we're currently enduring. However, the realization that age 35, the mother of 2 young children and the wife of a doctor, I am somehow considered a justified target for our next government's policies makes my blood run cold. In the big scheme of life, I know a bit of tax on school fees is not world-ending, but dystopias always start somewhere. Thank you for everything you do and have done. My sanity remains intact, well, I think, partly due to your determination to discover and explore the truth. You have my eternal gratitude.
A very, very powerful email from clearly an extremely decent person and an outstanding parent. This is from Catherine. A vote for the Tories, says Catherine, will only encourage the current Tory cohort of wet Lib Dems to continue with the status quo. That spell needs to be broken, and if a Labour government will be the result, it is the one we need to suffer. By the way, from the electioneering today, it's far from clear to me that Labour really wants to win this. And this is from Mike. The Tories are not going to get my vote this time. If I wanted left-wing claptrap, a very fine use of claptrap among Planet Normal correspondents, I think. Claptrap's a brilliant word. If I wanted left-wing claptrap, then I'd vote for Labour. The so-called Conservative Party deserve everything coming their way. And Nathan, I often think how that brave generation who won us freedom have now been betrayed by the globalist elite of today, of course, talking about D-Day veterans. They were fighting the real far right, and in a hero's return, they've witnessed the decline of our once great country. The D-Day dishonour by Sunak is the nail in the Tory coffin for me. My great-granddad landed at Anzio, so Mr Sunak could live in a land free of fascists. So that was a slap in the face to veterans and patriots. I am 19. Why would I vote for 2 parties which won't benefit me in the future at all? Mass migration will make it harder for me to buy a house. Wages will be undercut. I want to raise my kids in a safe country where they can relax in the park without being in danger of being stabbed. I don't want sectarianism in my country, forcing a fundamentalist ideology on my female relatives. GDP per capita will remain low. Sunak and Starmer won't change this. Nigel Farage inspires hope that we can change path. I think about leaving the UK if things don't change, as this green and pleasant land is being spoiled by a greedy elite. It's not xenophobic to want to not be a stranger in my own land. Immigrants can come, but they have to integrate. 20 million by 2040 won't help this. So everyone join the revolts on July the 4th, says Nathan. Put your X on your Reform candidate's ballot box. Vote Reform, says Nathan, to save Britain. I have to say, Nathan's email does reflect many that we've received at Planet Normal.
Lots of young people saying, where are we going to go? I mean, that to me is very, very, very upsetting.
On that bombshell, that's it from Planet Normal for another week as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reasoned views. Email of the week, it's the co-pilot.
It's going to go to Emily for her account of caring about her daughter. Almost certainly now they're not going to be able to afford to have this dyslexic little girl in the private school where she has flourished. What a shameful reflection on socialist spitefulness.
So, Emily, email us at planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Put in the subject heading to that email, mug winner. Give us your postal address down there in the West Country, and we will send you a rare as rocking horse poo Planet Normal mug. And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal and the madness of planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our fabulous producers, Isabel Bouchard, Cass Ho, and Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me
And it's goodbye from him.